afternoon. My name is Mrs. America, and I will be your host for today's short program to exhibit our exemplary presentations from grade 12. So again, before we begin with the um, presentation proper, may I again request those who have not yet renamed themselves, so please do so now to aid your teachers in identifying their own students. So again, that's your year level, followed by your TOK section, your last name, comma, your first name. So I'm sure we all know why we're here today, but to just set expectations, we are here today to listen and be fully present while our classmates from various TOK sections are presenting their exemplar works. So there will be 4 presenters for today, and they will each be given 7 minutes to present. That's 1 presenter for each TOK section. So the expectation is that while we are hearing the presentations, we give our full attention, and especially for our grade 11 students here, please take note of any questions that you may have for any of the presenters. And after all the presenters are done, we will be having a Q&A, and hopefully you will be able to ask your questions. If you're shy of asking your questions yourselves, you may send it to us and we can ask it on your behalf. So without further ado, I think we can begin with our first presenter. Okay, so please welcome from TOKA, Gabe Yu.
Thank you, Mrs. America. All right, so this is my TOK presentation. So the question that I chose to investigate was, does some knowledge only belong to particular communities of knowers? So when exploring this question, we have to focus on knowledge, where it belongs to, and whether it belongs to a community of knowers. So next slide, please. So to investigate this, I chose these 3 objects. My first object is a book, Adobe Photoshop CC for Dummies. My second object is my own personal Magic the Gathering card game deck. And my final object is a song by Dead Prez entitled Police State. So let's go into the first object. So this is the first object, again, Adobe Photoshop for Dummies. So what is the main argument I'm trying to make with this object? My main argument here is that knowledge that is held by specific communities can be obtained by those people outside the communities if they wish to do so. So what does that mean? It basically means that if there is knowledge held by a community of knowers, if I wanted to, I could try and access that information. So let's put this book into context. Personally, I use this book to learn Adobe Photoshop CC because it provides information on the tools and functions of the program, as well as ways to utilize it. Now, in my experience learning using this book, there was a lot of knowledge about Photoshop that I could freely access to learn. And even outside the confines of this book, there are many other resources made by designers that helped me learn graphic design as well as the program. So this shows how knowledge can really never be withheld by a specific community because it can be accessed or obtained in one way or another. So the fact of the matter is that even if the community of knowers, in this case, people who know about Photoshop, try to restrict the knowledge, the fact of the matter is that anyone can purchase the program and learn given enough time. So that's it for my first object. My second object is my Magic the Gathering card game deck. So again, what is my main argument here? My main argument here is that simply obtaining knowledge from a community of knowers makes the knower a part of that community. So you become a part of the community you took the knowledge from. So because you're a part of the community, the knowledge has never really left that certain community in a sense, and rather you are the one who just joined the community. So contextualizing the object again, this is my personal card. This is my own personal deck for Magic the Gathering. I've been using it for 3 years, I think. And so Magic the Gathering is a turn-based card game known for its gameplay mechanics, level of depth, and content. So how does this show that knowers can join certain communities? In my own personal experience playing Magic the Gathering, I originally didn't know much about the game, and I only played it because some of my friends played it. But then the more and more I played the game and learned about its mechanics, its content, I became a part of the community that plays the game. So here we see that um, there comes a certain point where a knower is indoctrinated into a certain community. Even if you've played Magic the Gathering only, like, let's say 4 times, or if you compare that to someone who's played the game for years, both of them are still part of the community that plays Magic the Gathering. Of course, there are different degrees to which they are a part of that community, but then nonetheless, they are still part of that community. And so the knowledge of the game and the knowledge that is held by that community is still limited to within the Magic the Gathering card game community. Alright, so for my final object, I have a song called Police State by Dead Press. So my main argument here is that there's knowledge that connects deeper and is more valuable within specific communities of knowers than to those who are outside that community. So what is Police State? Well, basically, Police State is a hip-hop rap song that talks about the struggles of the African American community in like the 90s and the 80s. So it touches on a lot of issues like discrimination, the war on drugs, police brutality, and the prison system, etc., etc. So what did I mean when I said that knowledge is sometimes more valuable within specific communities? So let's put this into an example. If I were to listen to this song, I would gain the knowledge about the struggles that the African American community had, like discrimination or police brutality. But then it wouldn't really make sense for me to say that I'm part of that community or that I can relate to that knowledge, because as you can see, I'm not black. Kidding aside though, this shows that there are certain boundaries that exist within the communities of knowers. So there are invisible boundaries or visible boundaries. So it can be things like race, gender, religion that separates certain communities from the outsiders. And while the knowledge is still freely presented outside, that community still has a level of exclusivity and privilege because that knowledge is a fundamental part of their identity. And so we can say that that knowledge fundamentally belongs to that community. So with these 3 objects, I presented 3 different perspectives. Again, the first one being that knowledge can be accessed by people outside communities. The second one being that knowledge is limited to communities because knowers become part of certain communities the more they gain knowledge. The last one being that some knowledge is fundamentally tied to the identities of communities of knowers. Thank you very much. That was my presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Gabe. A round of applause naman for Gabe. Okay, we will now proceed to our next presenter from TOK Section B this time. It's Matthew Aiden Guccieko.
So hello everyone, my name is Aiden Guccieko from grade 12B and TOK Section B. The question that I chose for my TOK exhibition is, what are the implications of having or not having knowledge? And I will be analyzing the prompt through the lens of knowledge and politics, one of the themes in the TOK course. And when using this lens, we look at the role of individuals, and not just individuals, but also systems, social systems, and their roles in dictating who gets to receive knowledge, who doesn't get to receive knowledge, and the impact it has on the state of knowledge in our knowledge communities. So putting the prompt in such a perspective, the prompt asks what would happen to us given 2 separate situations. Number 1 being the knower has access to and full disposal of certain knowledge. And number 2, the knower does not have access to knowledge, with such exclusion preventing them from achieving or doing something. So now here are the objects I chose. The first object is a scale. The second object is Attack on Titan. And the third object is the podium. Next slide, please. The first object is a scale that I have encountered many times in my journeys to the wet markets here in our country. Vendors usually use it to weigh certain products that they see fit to be priced by weight. It is a reality in this country here, evidenced by many government investigations, many stories that maybe I've heard. Such a way of determining the price is extremely flawed. Vendors would often give customers a higher price in order to earn more. Oftentimes, they'd get away with doing this without question. But when they are questioned by the customers, sometimes they'd even put extra weights on the scale. Or they just rig the scale so that they can show them evidence that the product is this heavy, therefore you pay this price. Such devious way of using the scale is a testament to the knowledge vendors have over their products and their business. It is a tool used in knowledge concealment, and it becomes such a good and effective tool for this purpose, mainly because the vendors have access to the knowledge of their products, whereas most customers do not. They have the knowledge of the real price, which also serves as the only evidence of the real price. And as such, they have the ability to give false information to the customers. This is called disinformation, which is essentially intentional misinformation. Furthermore, a normal customer cannot do anything to get a better price because they don't have evidence of the true price. So they'll suffer loss. And going back to the prompt, the implication that this scale presents is a result that arises out of a knower or a group of knowers having an increased access to knowledge, some things which others do not have access to. Knowers who possess this knowledge have the power to control situations to their benefit, and most of the time only for their benefit, because politics always favors one side. And as a result, people who don't have knowledge are excluded, they suffer loss, and ultimately they're silenced. So, next slide, please. Now, the second object is Attack on Titan, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. In case you're not familiar with it, the story is set in a walled city where a group of humans named the Survey Corps devote their lives to defending the city from man-eating giants called Titans. And one day, out of nowhere, a group of Titans invaded and caused chaos. Obviously, a lot of people died, and they died because of their physical inabilities to fight against the giants. But in my opinion, it was more because of their ignorance towards their situation. The implication in Attack on Titan is an implication that arises out of the majority not having knowledge, leading them to be in a stagnant and a regressive state. The truth was that their king was responsible for the existence of the Titans, but he had no intention of solving his mistakes. And for absurd reasons, he had no intention of sharing the knowledge about their city's history, about the Titans, and how they came to that situation. It was his goal to instill fear in his citizens so that they would stay within the walls forever, and the Titans became his tool in achieving this goal. And so, what happened to the common people in the story? They became overwhelmed with fear. They didn't want to know anything more, and eventually they became too lazy to seek out more in their lives. They gave their leader what they wanted, a state of ignorance. It made all of them cohere to one idea, the idea that the Titans are dangerous so they can't do anything about it. And when a knower simply coheres to the majority's belief, that belief becomes the one absolute truth. And when knowledge communities ignore the possibility for change, they can't progress. In Attack on Titan, luckily there were a few courageous knowers who were willing to take the risk, to venture out into the unknown, to seek knowledge that would help everyone. But in this world today, do you think we really have such bold knowers? And as such, through this example, we are reminded that oppressed knowers, although they may not have access to knowledge, they must always actively question everything. And that is not an option, because seeking knowledge, seeking more of the truth every single day is essential to forwarding our knowledge communities. On the other hand, lurking in fear and resentment, in ignorance to knowledge, is key to eventually destroying a knowledge community. It's key to not being able to reduce any more knowledge. And so my last object, the third object, sums up the points I stated for the first and second. I personally encountered the podium the most in the physical classroom, and I'd always find myself looking up at the teacher behind the podium. Aside from this, the podium is also used in many public speeches of political leaders, such as senators and public ministers. But it's not limited for powerful individuals. Even non-powerful individuals can use the podium. So it occurred to me that the podium gave its speaker a spotlight and a means to transmit their knowledge to others in a more formal yet amplified way. In a way, it made powerful knowers even more powerful, and thus more capable to spread or limit knowledge through their speeches. The podium supports a speaker and allows them to have control over their audience to a certain extent. As such, the podium is certainly a tool every knower can use in order to speak up, share their ideas, and unite knowledge communities when facing communal problems. It also gives oppressed knowers the opportunity to fight head on with the people who are oppressing them. And so with regards to the prompt, the implication here is that just because a knower has no access to certain knowledge, it does not mean that they don't have the chance anymore to stand up and achieve what they think they deserve. The power to change things is innate within all of us, regardless of who we are. Power is something a knower always has, and that power is inalienable, no matter what. Because what matters in the end is that through an object like the podium, all of us knowers are given a chance to exercise this innate power. But exercising it entails that we know that we have this power and we know how to use it and what to use it for. And so, in conclusion, the podium therefore reminds us of everyone's role, no matter how big or small that role may be, in breaking free from stagnant situations, in seeking for the knowledge we all need, the knowledge politics may have kept us from. That is my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Aiden. We will now proceed to our next presenter. Let's please welcome from TOK Section 3, it's Justin Rafael Chan.
Good afternoon. So I am Justin Chan from Cohort 11 TOKC, and my knowledge question for this exhibition is, what is the relationship between personal experience and knowledge? This exhibition of mine explores on the TOK core theme of knowledge and the knower, specifically on how personal experience is one of the three kinds of knowing. In a world where knowledge is vast, cumulative, collective, and interconnected, this kind of knowing can differ from person to person as we all go through different personal experiences. With that being said, my three objects are first, a photo of my XCE Futsian 2017 One-Tal Mentoring Group. Second, the Sweet Spot Cookbook. And third, the first trial deck of Body Fight entitled Dominant Dragons. So my first object is a photo of my One-Tal Mentoring Group in the Fucho Tulo Heritage Site in XCE Futsian 2017. From this, we can see how personal experience broadens, enhances, reinforces, and validates personal knowledge. And we can use this new personal knowledge on our future personal experiences. As part of the requirements of Xavier School, I chose to take my XCE, or Xavier China experience, in grade 8 when I was 13 years old. This was the first time I was ever separated from my parents for a long period of time in a foreign country. In this particular experience, I was able to gain new knowledge on Chinese culture, food, language, the way Chinese people interact, and many more. I also learned several values such as independence and responsibility, which I believe cannot be fully learned or actually applied without experiencing XCE, where I was in a dormitory doing my own laundry and managing my own money. This shows how personal experience can broaden and enhance the scope of our knowledge. Additionally, I am able to appreciate, apply, and develop these Chinese values and culture more and use them in the future in my daily experiences. As a Chinese Filipino, I also had prior knowledge about China, which was also reinforced by XCE. On the other hand, it isn't necessary for me to experience Chinese culture physically at China to gain knowledge about it, as information can be easily searched off online. But it is only through this personal experience that I was able to validate my knowledge and biases on China and even gain new personal knowledge, which changed some of my perspectives about the culture. I used to have the discriminative mindset or knowledge that Chinese people frequently spit on the streets, love spicy food, and talk badly about foreign culture, which was falsified by this experience, manifesting the value of validation by experience. Thus, immersing oneself in cultures certainly develops one's cultural knowledge greater in comparison to other tools, as the experience is not only firsthand but also eye-opening. Overall, I believe that this object enhances the exhibition because it clearly shows the never-ending and complementary relationship between personal experience and knowledge, as personal experiences undoubtedly broaden, enhance, reinforce, and validate personal knowledge, and personal knowledge is needed in living out personal experiences. My second object, next slide please, is a cookbook entitled The Sweet Spot by Bill Yoses and Peter Kaminsky, published in 2017. My main argument for this is that we use shared knowledge as foundations for our personal experiences, and these experiences allow us to validate the shared knowledge. The cookbook contains knowledge on the field of baking, with several recipes for desserts and tips to cut down sugar and calories for those who were conscious about what they eat. When I was 14, I developed a passion for baking pastries and cooking dishes, and this book was my main reference for creating them, both good and bad. Plenty of knowledge and personal experience are needed for me to be skilled in baking. From reading the book, I was able to learn different techniques and procedures in making pastries and apply these knowledge to my personal experiences of baking. Without shared knowledge from the cookbook, my cake batters would have been overmixed or undermixed, and my pastries would have ended up tasteless. This illustrates how knowledge serves as foundations or guidance in our personal experiences. Through the mistakes and challenges I've encountered in baking, I was also able to gain the personal knowledge needed to refine my skills and apply these skill-based knowledge in my subsequent baking experiences. Similarly, I will not be able to validate what I learned from the cookbook without putting it into practice. Recipes that I followed that ended up successful or unsuccessful allowed me to see whether the knowledge from the cookbook is true and reliable. For example, when a recipe from the book calls for 50 minutes in the oven, but you know the cake is already done at the 40th minute, you should remove the cake before it gets overbaked and dry, even if it means that you're not following the instructions of the cookbook. This emphasizes that personal experience is necessary for validating knowledge. In response to the question, I affirm that there is interdependence and interconnectedness between knowledge and personal experiences as we utilize shared and information-based knowledge as foundations for our personal experiences. Likewise, through the experiences we encounter, we will be able to get new personal knowledge that can be used in our future experiences. My third and final object for this exhibition would be Feature Card Body Fight Trial Deck 1 Dominant Dragons. This object demonstrates how information-based and procedural knowledge are requisite to some personal experiences, and this knowledge needs to be constantly experienced. For some context, Body Fight is a trading card game made by Japan's Bushiroad, and the standard trial deck, as seen on the slide, contains 52 cards of monsters, items, impacts, and spells. My brother introduced me to the game and taught me the different rules, but I didn't really understand what he meant back then because I never really personally experienced it, and the gameplay mechanics itself were very complex and in-depth. With this, I always lost to him in my first few rounds. Having more personal experiences through practice is essential in improving my skills and procedural knowledge in the game because playing the game firsthand allows me to see what I should or should not do in order to win. Through practice, I was able to validate the knowledge from my brother on how to play Body Fight and even explore the different combinations possible, which expanded my knowledge of the game. Moreover, if I did not have this procedural knowledge from my brother beforehand, I would not know how to play. I wouldn't know how to play the game, and I would likely break all the rules. This highlights the importance of having procedural knowledge in living out personal experiences. Moving on, procedural knowledge like Body Fight can only be strengthened with regular practice, time, and effort, or basically personal experiences. Before beating my brother for the first time, I lost quite a lot and still continue to play and learn more about the game's hidden strategies and tactics through experience and other methods and tools, such as the accompanying guidebook and online websites. This shows how any single experience is not enough to have mastery over a skill, as it must be supported by other tools, thus demonstrating the cumulative nature of knowledge and the limitation to knowledge gained from experience. All in all, this object manifests the complex yet complementary relationship between personal experience and knowledge. Information-based and procedural knowledge are requisite to some personal experiences and need to be constantly experienced. And consequently, not having any knowledge may be a barrier in living out these experiences. And that's it for my exhibition. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Justin. A round of applause for Justin. And finally, we come to our last presenter for this afternoon. Let's please welcome Jinivan Ong from TOKD.
Good afternoon. I'm Jinivan Ong of Cohort 11 TOKD, and the prompt I will be answering through this exhibit will be, what are the implications of having or not having knowledge? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Wait. Yeah. Oh, Okay, I think it froze on one of the slides. Sorry. So the three objects I've chosen are uh, The Bad Beginning, a children's novel by Lemony Snicket, um, Among Us, a game by Inner Sloth, and Google Translate, a free-to-use translation application. Next slide. So for our first object, I've chosen The Bad Beginning. It is a children's novel written by Lemony Snicket. It revolves around Count Olaf, an abusive guardian who plots to inherit the fortune of the orphans he has taken under his care through the youth by forcibly marrying one of the orphans. Now, I found this book in a summer reading list, and what I found interesting was how it explores the relationship of power and knowledge, and how knowledge allows one to liberate themselves from the deception of others and from one's own ignorance. Concerning the plot of the book, Count Olaf plans to forcibly marry one of the orphans in order to inherit or gain access to the Baudelaire fortune. However, his plan is thwarted by the orphans as Violet, the orphan he plans to marry, signs the marriage agreement not by her dominant hand but by her left hand, which invalidates the marriage as a whole due to an obscure law saying that both parties must sign the document by their own hand. Violet's knowledge of nuptial law allows her to liberate herself from the deception of Count Olaf. Her knowledge of nuptial law allows her to liberate themselves from Count Olaf's deception, and thus, in a way, answers the prompt given above here. What are the implications of having or not having knowledge? Now, of course, the orphans do not realize their plight until they have obtained knowledge on nuptial law. They do not understand that their lives are being put in danger by Count Olaf by having him marry one of them until they gain knowledge on nuptial law and realize that Count Olaf plans to forcibly marry one of them. So by by obtaining knowledge of nuptial law, the orphans are able to liberate themselves from their own ignorance to their own plight, and thus are able to liberate themselves from Count Olaf's deception. Next slide, please. So my next object is Among Us. As surprising as this object may be, Among Us does contribute some insight into which is necessary in answering the prompt. The game's mechanics, especially, show how knowledge is used to exert power over those without knowledge. The game involves imposters and crewmates. The imposters are tasked with killing the other crewmates without their knowledge and basically survive the entire game without getting voted off. So imposters have more knowledge than the crewmates in that they're aware of any other imposters' identities. Thus, they're able to use that knowledge to their advantage to manipulate discussions so that they themselves will not get voted off and can win the game. They are able to use knowledge in order to manipulate discussions, that knowledge becoming a sort of source of power for the knower. As cliche as it sounds, knowledge is equivalent to power. And this can result in epistemic injustice. Those with knowledge are able to oppress those without knowledge by applying that knowledge in order to oppress them, as seen as how imposters are able to use their knowledge of who the imposters are, as well as any placements or alibis they may have in order to manipulate discussions and deceive other players. Thus, knowledge can be used to exert power and influence over others without knowledge. Next slide, please. The final object is Google Translate. It is a free-to-use translation application, which has been created and maintained by Google. I use this application a lot during my XC trip to Yunnan. And I remember one specific instance where I was trying to order something at the restaurant and the waitress did not understand English. So I became quite frustrated when she did not understand my order. That is until I used Google Translate to translate my order. The thing is, differences in possessed knowledge can cause misunderstanding and discord between knowers. Because the waitress and I did not possess the same set of knowledge, the knowledge being what languages we knew how to speak, we both did not understand each other, and thus conflict arose from that misunderstanding. However, Google Translate is able to provide all knowers with equal access to knowledge, and thus eliminates conflict. The knowledge being provided being translations of different languages. Thus, differences in possessed knowledge can cause misunderstanding and discord between knowers. And that's it for my exhibition.
Okay, thanks, Ivan. Okay, once again, gentlemen, a round of applause for all our presenters for this afternoon. Okay, I'm sure you learned a lot, especially because you listened to all their presentations. Okay, so I believe we have sufficient time to entertain some questions. Do we have any questions at this point? Okay, if you are ready to ask your question, you can just simply raise your hand or you can include your question in the chat. Okay, so probably while we're waiting for our other questions to come in, this question is gonna be addressed to all our presenters, so anyone can answer. So, how are you able to narrow down the objects to three when you started choosing the objects for you to use for your exhibition?
Okay, I think I'll start, unless anyone else wants to, but probably not.
Go lang.
So when I was choosing my objects, so again, my objects were the book, my card deck, and the song. The first thing I looked for was places where you could learn knowledge, because the prompt was about knowledge from communities. So I thought of my own experiences and like when I was learning different things. So that's where my first object came from, the book, the dummies, Adobe Photoshop. And then for my second object, I'm not going to lie, I just looked around my house and I saw my card deck on the shelf. But then when I was looking at the object, I was able to make the context fit the question, because sometimes it's going to be really hard if you have a question and you try to think of an object. Sometimes it's better to look for things and then try to fit the context into it. And for my last one, I needed an example where I knew I wanted three different perspectives, and I already had two perspectives where knowledge could be attained. And then I wanted a conflicting perspective so that my discussion was balanced. So I thought of things that were very polarizing. And at the time, the Black Lives Matter movement was really blowing up. And so I thought about the context of race, and that led me to the song. And that's how I was able to narrow my objects. So it's important you're able to find good perspectives, but also have balanced perspectives in your exhibit.
Okay. Before our other presenters answer, because there's another related question, I'll just link it to the one that I earlier asked. So the question is about your advice in terms of choosing objects, and how do you find objects that are both personally relevant and relevant to TOK. So I think it's something that Gabe already answered. So the others can also answer in line with that. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'll be starting. So again, my question is, what is the relationship between personal experience and knowledge? So when I was thinking of questions before, I started by getting a piece of paper. Then I wrote down like a list of objects for two aspects. One is personal experience and one is knowledge. So I had like a very long list, but I already threw it away now. But like, and then after I got the whole list, and we had to make our we have to make our objects not parang it should be like not related. And then I also tried so with that in mind for personal experience, I used XCE Foods in 2017. So that's from a personal experience in China. Then my second experience is my second object is a book, and my third is a game. So when thinking of that, also I also had utilized of my TOK consultations with my teacher, because they will really help you. They will really help you in deciding what object if you're still unsure for your objects. And what I also tried to do when picking my objects was that I tried to think of objects that are kind of unique to my not really unique though, but like I don't really know the term, but something that would impress my TOK teacher, Mr. Bolasan, because I was thinking that for example, I don't see Mr. Bolasan as like a baking kind of person or someone who plays card games. So yeah, something like that.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, I will reserve my comments for later. Other presenters can continue if you also would like to answer this question.
Okay. So the way I came up with my objects, it was mostly a sort of trial and error thing. Most of my objects were not my original chosen objects. I had to change some of them because it didn't really fit the prompt. So it's really a lot of just testing and seeing how well the objects apply to the question. I believe the first object, I had to change it a couple times between books. I eventually settled on one that had a really big personal significance to me. It was a book that I had read since growing up, and when I went over it again, I found that it had a lot of insights when it came to answering the prompt, in that it allows people to liberate themselves from deception and their own ignorance. And for the second one, Among Us, funny story, I was playing Among Us when I came up with this because I was stressing out over not having enough objects. So what happened was I thought as a joke, what if I just used Among Us as an object? And then when I thought about it more, it weirdly made sense. So I went with it. You can use literally anything that for an object as long as it has personal significance to you. So I went with that, and it fit really, really well. And I'm glad I went with it, even though it's kind of funny to use that in an exhibit. And then for the third one, I tried to think of something a bit more unique. So I tried using an application. And the one that came to mind was Google Translate, because, well, translation can be a source of misunderstanding, and is mainly used to resolve not having sufficient knowledge to understand one another. So I felt that fit very well, so I used it. A lot of my objects came from my experiences with them. So what I'd recommend is just choose objects that you feel are significant to you, and see if they fit a prompt that you would want to discuss, basically.
Thanks, Ivan.
So and I didn't really have a specific process in choosing my objects. When I was thinking of objects, I was mainly thinking about my question and the context I wanted to answer the question in, which was knowledge and politics. And so I wanted to pick different situations, very different situations that fit into the context. So the first situation was what's happening in our country, but I didn't want to pick a big, very controversial situation. So I picked a smaller situation, something that actually happened to me, and that was people scamming me in the wet market. And so that's how I came up with that. And for the second object, I was actually already thinking of using the AOT for my TUK class while I was watching it, because it was really about how a leader and people who didn't care about their society, and how this affected the state of the knowledge in that society. And for the third object, at the time of the start of this exhibition, it was the time when the president of America was elected. And that time, I remember there was a poem. I think it was by Amanda Gorman, and she was behind the podium. And I was thinking, oh, a podium. Um, and that really inspired me, because when she talked about behind that podium, she was really, I can really hear her voice. And that's what I wanted to focus also, voice, because I think that was really important in my context again, considering my context, which is knowledge and politics.
Okay, thank you, Aidan. So I guess some key takeaways from what you guys shared would be the fact that it's really a process. So you have to be prepared to have a list, just like what Justin said. Sometimes list will be long and messy, and you might not be able to understand your writing anymore. But through that process of trial and error, you come up with a final list of objects, most of which might be significant to you, and then try to fit it in to your chosen prompt. And hopefully it pans out well with your consultation with your teacher. Okay, and he likes it or she. Okay, so let's proceed to another question. I think this next question is regarding constructing your argument. So now, say for example, you already have your objects, you have your prompt. What were the main things, or what are the main things that you considered in constructing your arguments to make sure that it's a TOK style of discussion? So I think our grade 11 students are very particular that, okay, on one hand, we use the jargon, but how sure are we that we're using it properly? Okay, thank you. As usual, if anyone's ready, I think Ivan's ready. Thank you, Ivan.
What I found that helps when constructing arguments, it's not enough to know the jargon, but also you have to learn how to define specific words you're going to use. If you have any keywords that you want to use, you have to define them well, and you should only use it in that context. Don't use different synonyms interchangeably because it can make it confusing and difficult to understand. And whenever possible, don't be afraid to ask for any criticism or help from your TOK teachers, because they they will give you detailed criticism about how you can make your work better. So keep in mind that you need to have good definitions of keywords, and don't be afraid to ask for criticism, basically.
Okay, I think I'll go next. So when I had my prompt, which was does some knowledge belong to particular communities of knowledge, there were two straightforward answers. That's yes and no. So yes, some knowledge does belong. No, some knowledge doesn't. And so I already had those two perspectives in mind. But then my middle object, I had trouble figuring out what to do with that. And so instead of looking at taking knowledge, I looked instead at becoming a part of the community. So I reframed the way I thought of the question. And initially, it didn't really work because I was talking with Miss Regala and she was like, both of these arguments sound too similar because you're just taking knowledge. But then I focus more on the distinction between the things that the knowledge is limited to within the community versus taking knowledge out of the community. And so again, having a balanced perspective helps, but also being able to focus on the individual, like what makes that argument special, and also talk to your teachers because they give good advice, really good advice. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, I was asked to give the relationship between personal experience and knowledge. So when thinking of arguments, you really have to understand the TOK knowledge question first. So what's asking for mine is the relationship. So so I was talking about like there's a complementary relationship, interdependent and interconnected relationship. So you have to be specific and direct. At the same time, it's on a TOK level. So and then after understanding the question, you should also like find a way, interpret it in different ways. So for my first object, I was showing how personal experience brings knowledge, which brings personal experiences. Well, for my second object, I did it the other way around. How shared knowledge gives experiences, and this experiences develops knowledge. And for my third object, what I did, since it was quite hard for me to try to make a separate argument, I did a mix and match of both of them, and I also added a limitation. So that's also something that you can consider.
So I agree with what Justin said. You really have to understand the question first. And that's why I also started my exhibition by dissecting the question. It says, what are the implications of having or not having knowledge? And so if you can see, the key term in the question is or, because a knower or a knowledge community can't have and not have knowledge at the same time. And so for each object, I wanted to highlight one specific part. So the first object, it was about having knowledge. What's the implications of having knowledge? The wet market vendors, what they can disinform because they have knowledge. The second one, um, the people in AOT didn't have knowledge, and that's why they just cohered to one idea, and that's why they became complacent. And for the third one, I didn't want to like hit having or not having it. I wanted to give a more holistic answer already to the question. And so, and another tip that I can give you is, yeah, you have to research terms very, you have to be specific about the terms that you use. And you want to also relate your answer. You want to think of the things like what happens to the knower, what happens to knowledge, and what happens to the knowledge community when answering all of your three objects.
Okay, thank you guys. So I think a large part of writing or preparing for your exhibition is ensuring that you understand the question properly, right? And then you plan from there what objects to use and how to attack the argument. The next question is actually still about the OK questions. Aidan already addressed it, and I believe some of you already addressed it a bit indirectly a while ago. The question is about how to analyze the OK questions, because sometimes you think that you understand it, but you end up sort of distorting it to your own advantage. And when you go to your teacher tells you that's not the way that you're supposed to attack it. So on top of what Aiden already said, is there anything you'd want to add?
Okay, I think I'm gonna start. So for the TOK exhibition, if I'm not mistaken, all or at least most of all the exhibition prompts have knowledge, and they're asking for like when developing state arguments for three objects, knowledge. If you keep using knowledge as is, like it's very vague, very it's very vague. So you have to like go further in understand what specific kind of knowledge. So there are different kinds of knowledge, like personal knowledge, past, present, shared knowledge, metacognitive, procedural, factual, conceptual, that you can also, that I think your TOK teachers will discuss during your classes. So yeah, that's something to take note when when answering and making TOK arguments for the exhibition.
Anything else from our others, or basically same thing? Okay, so essentially, it's very tempting to ride on the vagueness of knowledge, but that's the reason that you have your objects. You have to contextualize, and the objects will further help you to dissect the prompt. Okay, in the TOK, and this is something that you will also learn, as what our presenter said, through experience, because as of this moment, I believe you have gained inspiration to start working on your exhibition. Okay, so I have another question here. There are a lot of questions, wonderful. Okay, so next question. You have to listen because it's quite complex. Okay, given that your three objects led you to three different perspectives of exploring the prompt, some of which contradicted each other, to what extent can you say that you truly reached a conclusion or answer to the prompt, and how valuable was this conclusion for you? So I believe this question is regarding multiple perspectives. So as we know, perspectives can contradict each other on top of building up on each other. But in terms of the contradiction, how how did you come up with the conclusion, and how valuable was this conclusion to you? So I'll copy paste the question as well for your benefit, but feel free to dissect it already. There you go. Very pageant question. I love it. Okay, so given that these three objects led you to three different perspectives, okay, of exploring the prompt, and I think we all agree here that multiple perspectives, to a large extent, can improve the quality of the knowledge, right? However, how did you deal with the contradictions, okay, which were apparent? Okay. To the person who asked, can you nod if I interpreted it correctly? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right.
Okay. This
Okay.
feels like I'm answering another exhibit in the
Okay.
middle of my
So
presentation.
revalida pala. May actual na
There's even
panel. Okay.
there's even a to
Planted
what
question.
extent. Sure.
Sige, Gabe, you can do this. I believe you. Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna be honest here. I didn't really reach a conclusion. Like when you're presenting your three objects, when I presented mine, I didn't really reach a conclusion. Does some knowledge belong? Because again, I had different perspectives that were conflicting. But then I don't think it's a good idea to say that there should be a definite conclusion to the answer, because the point of the exhibition is to think about things in different ways. Like, why are we using objects to answer these questions in the first place? It's about looking at things from a perspective you wouldn't really see it before. And yes, there are contradictions. And then if your arguments do contradict each other, or if they're the same, it's not going to cut it with your teacher. So I think it's important to inject parts of each discussion within each other. So when I was discussing my first object, which was taking knowledge from the book, I said, yeah, we can take knowledge from the book, but should we? Like, do we have the right to take that knowledge? And then I discussed that further in the third question, where I talked about divisions between communities of knowers. Like, yes, I can take the knowledge of the struggles of the African American community, but should I take that knowledge? And the answer then was no. So you have to be aware that your objects aren't independent of each other, and that you can use what you learn from each object in each perspective. So the contradictions can help your argument, but then you also have to make sure that you're able to use the contradictions wisely. Yeah.
Thank you, Gabe. That felt like a very confident sharing. Okay, so let's hear from our other presenters.
Okay. I actually really agree with what Gabriel said. I don't think there's a definite way to answer a knowledge question. And we already have evidence of that, given that I share a prompt with another speaker here. I think it was Guccieko. And we had different conclusions or answers to the prompt, depending on our objects. So it's not very productive to say there can only be one answer, but rather it's more prudent to say there could be multiple possible answers. And I think there is a distinction to be made between a possible answer and a definite conclusion. You could have answers like mine was about what the implications are. A conclusion would summarize all of the possible implications there are having or not having knowledge. But an answer, a possible answer, can give like one implication. For example, an object can give one implication. It could be liberating from their own ignorance, or oppressing others without knowledge. Really, it's less so about arriving at the conclusion, but providing answers that could contribute to a possible conclusion. But a conclusion, I think, cannot be answered by one question, by one person alone. And these prompts are vague enough that a conclusion will probably never be reached in a single exhibit. It's more so about providing possible answers to the question, not simply concluding or making a conclusion for that question, basically.
Thanks, Evan.
Um, I'd also like to add that since we're given three objects, I think it's good that you pick three objects that will provide a different view of the question, because knowledge is like, if I were to compare it, it's like a gem with multiple facets, and you want each object to tackle one facet. And through learning from all those different perspectives, it makes your conclusion very, very valuable because you get to learn different things.
Yeah, I would also like to agree with the other three speakers who said their answers today. Because when you're making the when you're making the TOK exhibition, your goal is not really to come up with a definite answer for the knowledge question, but your goal is to actually dissect the question into many perspectives and choose 3 perspectives and analyze them alongside objects until you reach not really generalized, but like a very big conclusion. So it doesn't have to be like a definite one. And yeah.
Okay. So gentlemen, I hope you don't mind. We have one last question. I'd like to um use the comment of Miss Besenyo, my fellow grade 11 teacher. Um just to congratulate you guys on making sure, according to her comment, that the 3 objects that you use aren't the same in nature. So in short, it's some mixed media of some sorts. So I guess I want to come off from her question and just ask you generally, what's your important tip for the next cohort in terms of the curation of the objects in your exhibit, and a general tip that you can leave with them, especially if they feel stuck, like where to begin, where to start curating. So probably a tip or two that you can share.
Okay. What I could probably say is just okay. I remember what Gabe said about how he chose his objects. I believe he said he just looked around the room for one of them. Objects can be anywhere you look. You can use anything that has any significance to you, as long as you can provide a definitive justification for it when it comes to answering your prompt. So choose something that has value to you and that you know personally, and find a way to relate it to the prompt itself. And don't be afraid to experiment with different kinds of objects. Definitely don't use the same kind of objects. Don't just pick 3 books or 3 games. You can use anything, basically. You can use memes, you can use applications like Google Translate. You can use like a pen or a water jug, anything, whether digital or physical. So if it seems outlandish, it probably isn't, basically. So don't be afraid to just give it a try.
Similar to what Ivan said, just really just try picking something, guys. Just try picking something. If it works, it will work. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But then it's important to not feel discouraged when you're stuck, and talk to your teachers, because your consultation periods matter a lot, and they will really give good advice. Yeah.
Um, I know this is going to sound weird, but I guess my advice is to choose 3 objects and just stick with it the whole way. Maybe at first you won't be able to tackle the question with the object, but in the end, you're gonna learn how to tackle the question with the object, and that's that's a beautiful thing, that you're able to still answer the question while sticking to the object that you picked at the start.
Yeah, for me, I also did exactly what Aiden did, because my first 2 objects were actually from my grade 11 first semester pa. Then I used it again on second semester and improved it. And I used it, and I added a 3rd object for grade 12 first semester when I submitted my final TOK exhibition. And I was able to actually like improve it and enhance my answers, enhance my exhibition to answer the question. So when choosing, if you really want to go for a more if you really want to go for objects that don't have the same nature, you can start, for example, choosing one personal experience. If you have any personal experience, try to think of them, and if you have a picture of them, a documentation that's good, you can use it for your exhibition. Then a second one, I think it would be very easy for many of us, since we're in IB, to do something school related. That's also one tip from me. If you want, you can do something school related or book related for your objects. And for another one, anything that really interests you, you can try thinking of those also for your exhibition.
Okay, thank you so much to our presenters. Can we give our presenters another warm Zoom round of applause for their courage and their openness to share their presentations with us. Even if just a few minutes back they were nervous, it didn't sound like it. So thank you so much, guys, and to all our students here who were with us present all the way, and to who asked questions as well. Give yourselves a Zoom round of applause. So just reading out some key takeaways before we finally end. Remember that knowledge questions can be addressed in multiple plausible ways. Remember that we need to be comfortable with knowledge, that knowledge is provisional. And at the end of the day, it's time that we all become comfortable with uncertainty, because TOK is the space to adjust and to learn to do that. So once again, my name is Miss America, and I'm your advisor and your teacher in TOK. And thank you for being here, and thank you for being present. Okay, so grade 12 TOK teachers, do we have